Sweet.
Okay, so we are live, and this is 150 on the audio.
Yeah, 338 for me. Cool.
Okay. So this would be splicing in the title. Hi, I'm Ben Furman.
And I'm Nate Blyton.
And this is Patch In, the show from SoundNotion.tv dedicated to the wonderful world of electroacoustic music. Let's start off with some news. So, as you may have heard on the awesome news site Synthtopia, Propellerhead, the makers of Reason, have taken on Verdane Capital 9 as a new partner and thus their new default owner. Generally speaking, this is never a good thing when a company brings in a new managing partner. And considering how lackluster their recent updates have been, with version 9 in particular not doing anything really great or new, a lot of people are now wondering if this is the beginning of the end for the venerable SoftSynth program.
It's a scary thought, losing Reason of all things. But
well, I have been switching over to UVI's Falcon in a lot of my own work. So, yeah.
Nice. I haven't had a chance to try that out, but I guess here's a good excuse.
It's nice, but the download is pretty large. So
cool. So I'll have to do it at work, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah. 30 gigs is 30 gigs. What are you going to
do? Well, in the world of mobile devices, AudioBus 3 is out for iOS. In addition to letting you route audio among apps, it now lets you route MIDI as well as host audio units directly, and includes a mixer for your signals. It also lets you save load everything as presets. Sounds like a pretty good deal for $10. You should probably just try it out. iPad is not included, unfortunately. And as a non-iPad owner, I'm just going to have to watch other people use this and enjoy the sights and the sounds.
Well, maybe they will create an Android version eventually.
Yeah. Here's hoping.
If Google ever fixes the music API problems.
Yeah, sure. Exactly.
Which they've been saying since version 2. But
yeah, sounds good.
Yeah. And if you are a Reaper user, and if you're listening to this show, you probably already are. And if you're not, well, you really need to try it. I mean, for the love of God, it's $60. Just go out, buy it. I mean, that's my monthly coffee budget for Starbucks. But anyway, in the latest 5.40 update, you may have noticed a new little feature that is really, really cool. You can now change the display of waveforms to spectrograms or spectral peaks in the timeline. So when I first saw that in the changelog, it had me really excited because this is something I've always wanted to see in more DAWs when I'm recording, so that I can go and check and see if, that noise filter that I created really is filtering out the noise, or if it's letting a bunch of stuff pass through. So I tried it, and I was just, giggling like a teenage girl at a Beatles concert for quite a while. It's great. You have to do it, and then just play around with it. It is so amazingly useful in terms of cleaning up your signals and making sure that all of your splices are occurring where there is actual silence and not just where you think there is silence.
Sounds like an amazingly useful addition.
It is, and there are tons of options. You can customize the look and feel of everything, just like any other feature in Reaper.
Nice.
So I recommend it. But moving on, this is an interview that I've wanted to do for a while now. One of the things that we have been a little remiss in talking about on this show is installation art. So using computers to create site-specific interactive pieces of music. And our guest today, Jason Charney, happens to specialize in just that type of art. So Jason, welcome to Patch In.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your piece, Feedback Bowls, which is kind of hard to describe without having the visual attached.
Yeah, sure. Well, so this piece is it's an installation that I did first back in 2014. And I was interested in, I had been doing work with Max MSP for a long time, and also doing some learning to solder speakers, and actually doing physical objects separately. And so I wanted to combine both of these interests. It was kind of the initial drive for this. But the installation uses these mixing bowls, these commonly found steel bowls, and actually they could really be anything, because the principle of the piece is that I'm creating feedback across the surface of these objects, rather than when you hold like a microphone to a speaker and you get feedback because of the signal transmitted through the air. And these bowls are actually resonated by a transducer on the bottom of the bowl, and then also picked up by a contact mic. And so there are these discrete bowls that they don't really interact with each other because of the microphones and the transducers. But essentially, by creating a system of filters and triggering them on and off with a bunch of algorithmic patterns, I get this kind of unpredictable ringing sound world of all of these bowls that are essentially playing themselves. And it's kind of interesting and unpredictable in a way, because the way maybe I can describe this more, but essentially I'm turning up the gain on all of these microphones until they start feeding back, or anyway, the code is doing it, and then turning it down once it crosses a certain threshold. And so if the filter of that particular signal flow is close to the resonant frequency of the bowl, it'll feed back very quickly and then turn down.
Nice.
So anyway, there's a wide range of different results that can emerge, whether it's a very dense kind of pattern where a lot of them are ringing or not. So it's kind of a little more detail at
yeah. Now, on top of that, though, visitors to the space that the installation is set in, by just their presence, will also affect what's going on in the installation too, correct?
Yeah, and that is kind of hard to suss out how much of that is actually going on because of the nature of feedback. Like it's
Sure.
It amplifies all these small disturbances. But the way the algorithms work is, they start turning down the gain on these microphones when it starts getting too loud. So I found that the more people are walking around, the quieter the bowls actually tend to be. Yeah. And I think people are actually drawn to trying to interact with them without knowing the mechanisms. I think there's just that something about it that people think that it's not explicitly interactive, but it does kind of respond to the environment. I've just noticed through installing them in different places.
That's pretty cool. And like being mixing bowls, it's like not something a visitor might be afraid to like go up and be near.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And it is kind of hard to tell which one is going at any particular point, because a lot of the time these pitches are high and kind of hard to localize. So
sure. Yeah.
The pitches are really fairly high, because they're essentially Larsen tones coming through those. It really reminded me of kind of the beginning of the Xenakis La Legendaire, where you have these really high tones just kind of existing for a really small fraction of time, and then fading in as another one comes in, and then gradually becoming longer and longer and more present before he starts switching and morphing them into other samples.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that kind of the purity of that sound. I think it's probably, I haven't experimented a lot with other materials. I chose these because they were commonplace and cheap to get a bunch of different sizes. But I imagine the effect would be pretty similar for any object, but I'm curious to see how that would affect the overall tone.
Yeah, expense is definitely an element in working on installation pieces, I'm sure.
It sure is, yeah.
Yeah.
So did you find it an interesting process, like doing the coding, finding resonant frequencies, and kind of playing with the threshold of how how much sound was long enough, or things like that?
Yeah, essentially, there was a lot of the first iteration of it was a very different process, and it took me a while to kind of get it into a reliably consistent setup. But certainly, I came across a lot of things that I've never considered before in working with feedback. For example, the microphone placement in relation to the transducer placement on the bottom of each bowl is wide. It's very different depending on where it is. So I essentially compress the signal when it comes in, and so like actually all the gain scaling is kind of, I have a hard limiter on the output as well, so it's never going to get too loud. But as it starts accumulating gain, the code is looking at, okay, am I at the threshold yet? If so, start turning down. Then as it starts turning down, it realizes, oh, I should start turning up again. So I have these equilibrium preventers, and it was kind of hard to find the right place to really have the code know, okay, am I at equilibrium? Is it time to actually start turning down because I've been sitting at this level for too long? Or it took me a while to kind of figure out how feedback works in a way that can be put into code and actually come out with something that sounds good. So
cool. Yeah.
Now, I'm assuming that for each bowl you have to basically copy the code to some level, but is there an easy mapping based on the size of the bowl that they have resonant frequencies that are multiples of each other, or are they just completely at random?
It's actually, yeah, it's I experimented with that, and I wanted to originally, map those out so that they were in some relation to their actual resonant frequencies. But I actually just have the same code for each bowl. And because there is a filter involved, any of them can resonate at any pitch, essentially. The big ones, actually, I've presented this with several different size ones. The most recent ones have been these quite large, restaurant size
cool.
mixing bowls. And those are actually more difficult to get resonating. It'll take a lot more gain to accumulate, and especially for lower pitches. So as the pitch gets closer to whatever the resonant frequency is, which I don't even know what they are for a lot of them.
Cool.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
It makes it pretty flexible, I guess.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. And then have you experimented with putting other things into the bowl? Like pouring water in there, or sand or rice or something?
I have, and that was actually my original concept as I was playing around with this. The trade-off is that to get interesting visual patterns, I tried water, I tried little ball bearings, just anything to get any sort of standing wave patterns. The trade-off is that it doesn't sound very good. So I have yet to actually figure that part out, but I've tried a lot of different things, and I want to experiment more with doing some of those, what are they, Chladni
patterns?
Yeah,
cool.
Doing some of those in the future, because transducers are such a great tool for physical activation, and they're relatively cheap and do a lot of things with them.
I know there was a video on YouTube that was circulating about a month ago on Facebook where there was a guy who was experimenting with Chladni patterns on a giant piece of square metal and a bunch of couscous on it, and it was basically suspended, and he just bowed it at different locations.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Nice.
Yeah. If our listeners are not familiar with that, just Wikipedia it. We'll have information in the show notes. It's very, very cool.
Yeah. Well, and so I guess speaking of a visual side to this bowl project, you've got a variation on it, chromatic bowls. which incorporates some RGB LEDs as well. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. I did this variation for a sound art residency last fall in Kansas City at Kiosk Gallery. And it's essentially the same piece except with an LED suspended inside a ping pong ball for diffusing it above each bowl. And they're essentially just reactive to the bowls themselves. And the brightness is directly mapped to amplitude, and so it kind of helps you visually localize which of these bowls is sounding at any one time. And then the color is related to the Newton's color wheel that he was, I think in his book Optics, where he, I think it was pretty arbitrary to map out, a D Dorian scale to, the Roy G. Biv color wheel there. And so I used that mapping and essentially figured out a way to interpolate colors between each of these depending on what the frequency was. So, there are pitch collections that come up where it is like a diatonic collection, and you get a wide mix of colors across the spectrum, or one where they're just octaves, and so they're all kind of variations on red or something like that. But a lot of the pitch collections that come up are very microtonal, and so you'll get like they might be in one little segment of the color wheel, all of the filter frequencies, but kind of close to each other. So it's kind of interesting to see that how that worked, and add that element of visual to it, especially because the way the installation is designed, because they're so high pitched. I didn't really, it doesn't sound all the time. It's like in these little episodic moments that vary between 2 and 3 minutes, and then there's like a minute of rest between them where it changes parameters. And so during those rest periods, there's like these patterns that go among all the lights of white color. So
cool,
kind of representing the full spectrum of visual light there.
An interesting intermission to program.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Now, how does the audience reaction differ when you add the lights versus not having them?
I think the concept becomes clearer in a way, having the extra sense of reinforcing that these are, kind of individual agents acting on their own, because the way I've installed it before, they're fairly close together. And so, as I said, it's hard to figure out which one is doing which, but I think it becomes a lot easier to explain how the sounds are changing, and, the amplitude. You can actually see each of the lights getting brighter as it gets louder and then fade away. And so it's I think people want to also interact with it in the same way, but at least in this iteration, they're all hanging from the ceiling right above the bowl. And so it has had people less likely to like get their hands inside the bowl and try and play around with it, which has happened a lot, actually. Yeah.
I was wondering about that as to if having the LEDs would inhibit people from interacting with it.
Maybe, and it might make it seem. I'm not sure if it makes it seem more or less interactive, because people have this. I don't know if confirmation bias is the right word here, but when I remember like being a kid in an arcade, and like there's the insert coin screen where like it also shows gameplay going on behind it, and sometimes you would get the sense that you were controlling it just by like pressing a button, and then something would happen. It's like, oh yeah, I must be playing this game. And so I think people are a lot more likely to perceive that without the lights, because they're like, oh, it reacted to me because I walked over here. And it's like, well, maybe it did or maybe it didn't. It's just there's so many factors in the system, it's hard to tell.
Right, and that's always a question. How much of the system do you reveal to the audience?
Right, and I don't think that, in particular, art that's based around interaction is interesting if there is such a one-to-one mapping between audience participation and what results in the system. I think that it's really, by the same token, if you can't tell, if it says it's interactive and you can't tell what's making it interactive, then it's not engaging either. So it's about, writing that line. And I think that's a big part also of designing sound for installations, because another interactive element, whether the material and the medium is interactive, the content of the installation itself, the medium always is, even if it's a fixed loop that's running and people can come in and out, they're the ones who are determining their concept of the form. So you have to be aware of the different lengths that people are staying as well. So that's another topic.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's
well,
that's interesting.
I'd actually like to go down that rabbit hole a little bit. How long do people stand in front of a interactive piece like this, and how do you have to tailor your composition of the piece for that?
I think it really depends on, first of all, the space it's being presented in, the context. Let's see, this piece was presented at a conference where it was like in front of the main recital hall of other things happening. And so like people are just there anyway, and they can kind of background it a little bit. It was also in a room at a gallery where it was very small and you had to kind of go in. It had this kind of cloistered thing where you actually have to consciously go in and engage with it. Or in a large room in a similar situation. I think people tend to either stay for a very short period of time where they're just kind of taking it in just a little bit, or I've seen people stay for a very long period of time and really kind of, especially this piece is very meditative for a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, it really does have a kind of a nice Zen feel to it.
Very calming.
And it's also depends on just in general, like the other sound works being presented, or if there are other multimedia, like it's kind of hard it's not so easy as putting a painting on the wall where it's self-contained, sound propagates.
Yeah, a little more setup, a little more interaction with the rest of the stuff around. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I read somewhere that the average attention span given to a framed painting in a gallery is something like 7 to 20 seconds.
Wow.
So I don't know. I mean, that's definitely me when I'm going through a portraiture gallery and it's like, oh, look, it's another dead white guy.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah. Well, where's the modern art section?
Yeah, I feel the same way. 20 seconds is generous for that.
Yeah. Oh, another steel bowls installation. Jeez.
It's I went to this exhibition at the Hirshhorn Museum in DC a couple months ago. I haven't been to the one that's up now, but this was a whole video art thing where everything's in a sequence of rooms, and you still kind of get the sense of being herded from one to another. So I think the curation is really important, even though there are these really in-depth and engaging and beautifully presented works. It's just dependent on it. A lot depends on the space, even if it's a completely adaptable museum room that can become a white cube.
Yeah, that's right.
Adapt something else. So.
Right. Well, now speaking of adaptable and white things, you have another installation. You know where I'm going with this, called In Futurum, which is very interesting from a sound artist because there is no sound.
Right.
But it's more of the ghost of a sound, I guess, is how I would describe that to people.
This was an interesting work. The title comes from the piece that I modeled it after, which is this piece by Erwin Schulhoff called In Futurum. It's for solo piano from 1919. And in this piece, which is predates Cage's 433 by decades, There's no sounding music. It's just all notated rests, but there's actually rhythm and phrasing among these rests. There's a whole bunch of other Dada stuff in it, like, like these smiley face note heads and
yes,
these irrational time signatures and just like goofy Sati like instructions to the performer. But I was interested in the performance practice of this piece because it's not a standalone piano piece. It's the third movement of a longer work for piano, and the movements that surround it are, they're regular piano pieces. So like if you want to perform this entire work, what do you do with this middle movement? And I found a couple performances where people are like pantomiming the rhythms with their hands just on top of the keys, which I think might work, but there's actually music in this durational notation, and how do you present that in a time-based way? And so I did it with light in this particular installation.
Yeah.
Well, light, but also with piano pieces.
Right. I thought it was he's kind of the whole Dada. He was very, much into Dadaism and breaking down the confines of presentation of art itself. And so it's like, why not break down that instrument too if it's not going to sound? And so I hide all of the lights within the instrument. And there's like a set of left-hand lights and a set of right-hand lights, and they play out this piece in rhythm. And there's little subtle variations every time it repeats because I want to imitate some kind of performance. And yeah.
I like so in the kind of document that you have for talking about this piece, you describe how in different iterations of going through the performance, it happens at slightly different tempos. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It kind of hovers around 100 beats per minute or so. But even so, the very first measure of the piece is I believe the right hand is in like 16/7 or something, and the left hand is I can't remember exactly, but it's already really.
I just pulled it up actually. The first measure, the right hand is in 3/5 and the left hand is in 7/10.
Oh, great. and I believe the translation of the tempo marking is like with great vigor all the way through to the very end or something. So
my Italian's not good enough for that. So yeah.
I had a lot of liberty in interpreting this, but also like, how do you play an upside down fermata and 4 exclamation points? You know what I mean? So I tried to make this like in consistent logic with how that would be interpreted, but who knows?
And as performers, that's I guess what we do. It's always interpretation. This is just a little more. So I guess it's kind of awesome. Yeah.
I am interested in sound art that because sound art is it's not just art that makes sound, but like I feel there's a lot of room for it to address the medium itself. And so it's like there's a lot of interesting work out there where it's I should have prepared a little more for this, but I forget the artist who this guy just went and recorded a bunch in abandoned rooms in Chernobyl, and technically he's committed all of the sounds of these places to recording, but it's not the sonic result is not necessarily audible, but it's there at the same time. So I think there's a rich conceptual framework you can work in with sound.
Could that be Jacob Kierkegaard?
Yes, Jacob Kierkegaard, 4 Rooms, I think.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll have a link to that in the show notes.
Nice. I was thinking more of Yoko Ono and some of her stuff from like the 80s and 90s.
Oh yeah, sure. I think she's like, in direct lineage of Schulhoff and his contemporaries too. It's like absurdist, but very conceptually engaging.
Yeah.
Right. And I know Frank Zappa had a lot of thoughts on that as well.
Yeah. Well, so you've talked a little bit about the sound of materials with the and the sound of spaces.
Mhm.
And there's this other piece of yours, root system,
Mhm.
which it seems like it's an extension of another existing piece of art, which is a really interesting idea. And there's a cool video that we'll have a link to on Vimeo of kind of what it looks like and sounds like. But can you talk a little bit about this piece?
Yeah, so I did this piece as a site-specific response to a sculpture by Harry Bertoia, who people may or may not be familiar with as this sculptor, designer, really kind of a Renaissance man in 20th century art and design. He made this series of works that are these metal sculptures that he called the Sonambient series. And in fact, Important Records last year released all of these, a remaster of all these recordings he made. They're out in a bunch of these sculptures are not only in museums, but out in this shed in Pennsylvania that he worked and recorded in, and made hours and hours of recordings of these like very haunting metal tine sculptures that you can activate by, they're flexible, so you can touch them and the tops hit against each other. He made them in all sorts of shapes and sizes. And I was at the time I was a student at Bowling Green State University, and they have one of these Harry Bertoia sculptures, and it had been located in a public space, I think over by a football stadium or something like that, for years before, and was the victim of some vandalism. And so they took it off public view and then eventually restored it, but they put it in this courtyard in the art building that you can't get to. Like, it's a very beautiful sculpture, but you can only get there by going through the interior gallery door, and with a key from the director, so you can't hear it, and you can't even touch it to be able to activate it, let alone have the wind blow through it and activate these sounds. So it's kind of sonically isolated where it is, and although it's a beautiful work, you wouldn't know that it's meant to make sound. And so I got permission to go and record it, and I was struck by this tree that was near it as well, in this courtyard, and I made a 4-channel installation that kind of does this iterative process where it concatenates all of these small clips of recordings I made of the tree, and then it'll kind of create this branching system. And if it branches, it'll like choose a depth. If it branches left, it'll stretch it out a little bit in time while preserving its pitch, and then re-record that process. And then the next level of depth down, it might branch right, in which it'll go down a little bit in pitch. And so you get this changing process that's kind of like a Lussier iterative. Like I'm sitting in a room also, it's recording the playback of the previous depth. And as this happens, it moves away from the window where you can see the sculpture across the lobby of the gallery, and then waits a little bit and repeats again. Nice. With a whole different set of parameters. Yeah.
Okay. Now, I was wondering about the concatenation process that you were using for that. Was that just adding one directly to the end of the other, or were you crossfading between those to smooth it out, or doing anything like that?
Nope. Just it just essentially picks. I have all these small, different samples of the sculpture, and then it'll just pick 3 at random and stick them right next to each other into a buffer.
All right.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful piece.
Oh, thank you.
An interesting idea too, of kind of recovering this, like it's almost like a political thing, of like saving the art that stuck out in the courtyard. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's at the very least it hopefully creates awareness of what that piece actually is. And I think that's just sonically is really rich, a really rich sounding instrument that I hate for people not to be able to hear. And this is coinciding with Harry, think maybe 100th year anniversary of Harry Bertoya's birth. So it was like,
Okay.
yeah. I got in contact with his daughter who runs his foundation and everything. She was very much into it. So
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has a really interesting timbre
Oh, yeah.
to the sound of the sculpture itself. It's sort of like wind chimes, but with like an odd harmonic series thrown on top of it as well.
Yeah. It's really, I think having them instead of like freely hanging like wind chimes are, the way that they sway back and forth creates this
Right.
like extra like amplitude modulation or something like that. It's really,
Sure, yeah.
I've never heard anything like it before.
Yeah, for our listeners, if you picture like a cat's tail, like if you're down at a pond and you see the cat's tail sticking out, picture a bunch of those stuck together and freely able to move so that they can bang into each other at the tops, and you'll get really interesting sounds as a result.
And this piece is huge too. It's like 20 feet tall or something.
Definitely
that big.
I'd say it's probably about 12 feet tall.
Okay,
something
12,
like that.
yeah.
It is rather large though.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah, it's a little hard to tell from the photos.
Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. Exactly.
Other than it's big.
Yeah. And he has, a lot of them that are quite small or tall, but have very thin tines or
Gotcha.
more or less. So there's quite a bit of variation. But I would encourage you to check out at least some of the samples from the release on Important Records that just came out last year that has all of these beautiful recordings that he made.
Cool.
Nice. But kind of following up on this idea of music without sound, you're working on a new installation right now that I'm going to hesitantly call electroacoustic music without electricity.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, the joke is horrible. I realize, but you're doing a piece for the Naked Eye Ensemble. It's a site-specific installation with performance that can happen on top of that, and you're using Amish hymn tunes as source material.
Correct. Yeah. Which, as you said, without electricity. They commissioned me to create this site-specific piece for this space in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, called the Trust Performing Arts Center. It's this huge, like, Beaux Arts bank that has changed hands a bunch of times, but it is modeled after the old Penn Station in New York. So it's just this huge resonant space, and it's gorgeous.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to do something with that resonance and something related to its history and the area's history. And I found these Amish hymns as I was exploring, and have you ever heard Amish singing before?
I listened to the sample that you sent us.
Yeah, it's wild. Like, I mean, there's a lot of traditions I think that are like that, where there's not, untrained singers, but there's no leading singer there. It's they're kind of all moving together, and pitch is really flexible, and like it's stretched. All of these tunes are, each syllable is kind of stretched out to the point of unintelligibility. And the title of the piece, Åsbund, is a reference to the hymnal that they've used since 1564, and there's no notation written down in this at all. It's because all of the tunes are passed down orally. And so that kind of served as the musical inspiration for this. And I'm actually in the installation part of it, which I'm using 4-channel electronics. I am manipulating recordings of an Amish congregation singing one of these hymns.
Are you using both the call and the response portion of the hymn, or are you using just the call and then having the performers respond to it as well?
I'm just having the performers. Well, I'm having the response actually being in the electronics, and the call is only played once by one member of the ensemble for each movement.
Mm-hmm.
And so actually what's all this kind of like the score for these musicians is kind of maybe one of my inspirations for this was like Frederick Shevsky's pieces of like coming together, and where everyone's kind of reading off the same score and has instructions to do different things, and a flexible number of ensemble members, but they're kind of following this grid of choices of these numbered tiles that are inspired by the pattern of tiles on the ceiling of this space. And each one of these has a different number in it, and they mean different things to different players in the movements. So they're kind of just creating this sound world, and it's and the rules that govern the sounds of the electronics in the installation are the same and operate on the same parameters as of the players. So it's kind of they can exist without each other, but hopefully they'll complement each other. And I haven't done anything like that before, so it'll be interesting when we start rehearsals how that process actually goes.
Yeah. That sounds pretty great. And like, yeah, just working with these different kinds of processes. And yeah, I guess I've got one question. So the recordings of the Amish singing that you're using, is that like historical recordings, or is that like current Amish people?
Well, I found through this this woman who has written a couple books about, she grew up in an Amish community and left it, and she has some information on her site about this style of singing and some clips. And so, I downloaded them, was playing with them, and I contacted her and said, do you own the rights to these? Can I use this recording from you? And she said, oh, this was a home recording that somebody in Indiana gave me of a congregation near there, so there's no copyright, like you can go ahead and use it. I said, all right. So I don't know where the source of these, but certainly enough that certainly recent enough that someone recorded it and put it on a CD to sell to her. So
that's fun. Yeah, if it was somebody that you knew, I was going to make the joke of like, and do they know that you're using electricity along with
yeah, the English corrupting.
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I suppose you could use a gramophone if it was the hand cranked version, but
yeah. Well, that's, I mean, it's kind of, there is kind of a disconnect too with like having vocal samples. So I'm like really trying to use a lot of, spectral blurring techniques and stuff to like really abstract it. So maybe getting that unstable pitch content, but less of the words and voice quality. Mm-hmm.
Now, are you going to apply that to the instrumentalists who are performing this as well? Because I know, reading through the score, one of the goals is to make it seem that certain performers are untrained singers themselves.
Right. And so like, if they're playing they're, maybe trying to tune to each other, certainly follow each other without having a clear leader designated. So, timing is going to be very flexible in terms of who is controlling the flow of the phrase, but also they have to listen to the electronics to cue in and out, and then listen to each other to know where what pitch to go to next. And sometimes they'll enter in wrong, I'm sure. And if they're not playing a C instrument, they're going to be transposing the notation by sight, which I hopefully wouldn't be. I know won't be difficult for these musicians, but
yeah,
right.
It's an extra layer of stuff.
Yeah. And I want to invite that kind of pitch variation as well, because it really slides around quite a bit from beginning to end of phrases.
Yeah. Nice. Now, and then what happens if a performer loses their place within this? Would you pull a Rzewski like Les Moutons and have them just keep going?
Pretty much, yeah. I want it to be kind of it's a durational performance. There's hopefully a formal shape to it, in that people I give them a lot of room of interpretation, but then also the electronics have this cueing effect where they pull people in and out, and hopefully it grows. But in a lot of ways, it's just kind of a slice of a timeless sort of environment. So if they make a mistake or something, I'm not too worried about what will happen. As singing in a congregation, maybe you set out that phrase and come in the next one, and I'm hoping that kind of thing will happen. Actually,
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, can't wait to hear how this goes, I guess.
Yeah, me too. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, so I guess, yeah, we've been talking about some of your installation pieces, and this one introduces performers. Obviously, so you're a composer in a more traditional sense. We say traditional, like doing electroacoustic music and stuff. But
yes.
So you've shared with us some of your really interesting pieces for instrumentalist or vocalist and electronics as well.
Mm-hmm.
There's one of my favorites. This you shared with us a YouTube video of the Hypnodome speaks and speaks and speaks.
Yes.
Yeah. It's a pretty radical document you've put together there. The video.
Wow. Yeah, we had a lot of fun shooting that for sure.
Yeah.
The video we'll put up on the show notes, and I really encourage people to check it out. It's really well done, and the vocalist is really, really phenomenal.
Yeah, I have to give credit to my friend Nick for making that video. Nick Zulik, who's also a fantastic saxophonist, but who I've collaborated with a lot. But and then Jennifer Beatty, the vocalist who I worked with and created the piece with and for. She's just an amazing singer who's willing to pretty much do anything. And we put together this piece and for premiere in May and last May, and then have kind of edited and kind of reimagined some of the stuff, and it's just been a blast to work with her on it. So
nice.
Yeah. I love how you are kind of starting off in open free meter. Everything's very loose in terms of tempo, and then you start going into specific durations of time and then actual music, and then you start to actually groove a little bit.
Yeah, I want that. I kind of like to have it both ways. Where actually, my installation work kind of grew out of this not wanting to commit to certain time durations or interpretations, and so it's like a lot of the electronics can kind of go on indefinitely from cue to cue, and you just kind of advance when you're ready. Or and so doing a mix of metric and free stuff, I think gives, especially for a piece that requires as much theater as this one, and gives them a lot of freedom.
Nice. Yeah. So yeah, like in the theater world, as you say, like there's a board operator who's ready to press go when the actor does the thing. Whatever. But yeah, and so it's cool getting this world of computer music where the computer can play that role. And yeah,
absolutely. Especially if there's if in the kinds of effects that you're applying have a certain randomness to them, like why wouldn't you also incorporate that into other parts of the composition as well? And a lot of the time also I've the way I like to work with instrumentalists is to do a lot of improvisation together and kind of uncover things that work for them and their instrument specifically. And so I feel like and then I kind of codify those into a score at the end of the process. But in a lot of the ways, it's very specific to them. And so I want others who approach the piece to also kind of have that kind of exploratory role in doing the piece as well.
Yeah. And and another favorite part of my of this piece to me, so Ben mentioned that there was some groove that happened, but even pretty close to the beginning, there's like a bass drop that was like, this pop device or whatever, and so it's pretty cool layering or juxtaposition going on in this. But yeah, congratulations. What kind of and in your other work, I haven't seen as much of the pop stuff either. But so what how does that fit in with the concept of this piece?
I mean, I do some, like pop electronic stuff just for myself some of the time, and and for this one, this is kind of the first. I've worked with text and singers before, but like to actually do some stylistic references and like I said, kind of theater. Like I want that this piece is intentionally campy and like fun. I want it to be fun and a little creepy as well. And so I feel like to really engage and help the performer get into this like kind of hammy role, making those references I think is helpful. But yeah, I also just really like the sound of a really deep like sine tone bass, and
exactly.
like I think in grooves as well, so why not?
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
And this may have my favorite indication to the performer of all time. Like a cabaret singer, banter between ballads, pausing for cigarette drags.
Oh yeah, I think that's at the line, why do I do it is easy.
Yes.
My way through school. Which actually usually gets a laugh from the audience, so that's
nice.
Yeah.
So that's actually something I was wondering. It's like so my experience of this piece personally is as a music video, basically.
Yeah.
And which is obviously probably a pretty different proposition than having somebody do this live in a hall and stuff like that. Have you found like, do those two formats inform each other, or are they totally different things?
That's an interesting question. I was just talking with some future collaborators about this who want to do a piece. I mean, they're instrumentalists, but they want to do a piece where the piece is, or the product is the music video, and it's not just a document. For a piece like this, I think there's a music video is fun, especially with a narrative text, and focus on acting for it in a way. Right. But I certainly think that the music video has a chance to be a document, or beyond a document. Sure. In working with Jen in this, performing it live, I think she gets she really does the different roles and the different moods very well. And I think it can exist. It's designed to exist, independently of that, of the music video. But those, basically just for fun. But there's a lot of interesting stuff out there that I think, or it's an interesting concept, I think, for composers to think about. It's like, how do you make it a piece of art on itself rather than just documentation?
Yeah, and you mentioned having it both ways before, and it sounds like having it both ways with this too, as a piece of its own and as a live thing. Yeah.
Well, cool. And maybe there might be a way to adapt it to be able to perform live with a version of it or something like that. I'm interested in this kind of flexible.
Right.
Use it as source material.
Video background or special programmed lightings or whatever. Yeah,
exactly.
Could be, I mean, that's a rabbit hole if I ever heard one, right?
Oh, for sure.
And that's before you even start messing around with After Effects.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Which will come, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly.
I still haven't pulled the trigger on that yet myself.
I got to do that in the class in school, so I didn't have to like get into it on my own. And haven't come back to it in a while, but it's nice to know it's there.
I'm excited to explore some more of that, because a lot of the time we look at it and it's like, oh, I know what I want to do and I think this is the way to do it, but there's all of these different like codecs and like practices that I don't know what. I'm sure it's easier than I'm making it out to be a lot of the
time. But not overly simple. Right?
No, that's true.
But I mean, many of our listeners probably has spent the time figuring out a audio or music programming language, and then getting into a whole different kind of thinking. It's
which I'm sure for you guys as well is like part of what's fun about being or working with electronic media as
Yeah.
creatives, because it's like, oh, you can like endlessly iterate and find new ways of thinking about stuff without like on the way to a destination that probably will change, you know.
Exactly.
Oh yeah. Well, and then once you get to the destination, I find myself going back there and saying, okay, what would happen now if I had an LFO here? And I slowly start to change everything even more than what I already did.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in like the kind of exploration process you were talking about with the feedback walls. Yeah, it's totally.
And going back to that, I think that in that sense, like having it be modular, in that I, you know, can change the code for one and then it can go to all the others, or, you know, just like add in a mode. It's very easy to iterate and add extra features to the work.
Nice.
Right. But then the problem becomes, when is the work officially done?
And I mean, I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a better, I'm more comfortable with that state of constant not incompletion than anything, or than like having to call something complete that doesn't feel like it's ready to go out. And so, you know, at some point it does have to like be premiered. It's or good enough, but like, you know, it's been liberating, especially like with concert music, to premiere something and then keep working on it. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Well, and nowadays you see that too in so many other fields. Like, you know, you have software that comes out and then immediately has the 1.1 update.
right.
Or in the case of video games in particular, you see they release one and there's 5 patches on release date come out.
Yeah, maybe I just think they are too cheap to pay beta testers anymore. They'll just everyone will just take it, and you find our bugs for us.
Right. Well, I'm just waiting for with ebooks, when you'll have updates to the ebooks as people discover typography errors or misspellings or something like that.
Yeah, I haven't thought about point versions for a book, but you know,
yeah.
editions,
Man.
right?
Yeah.
You guys just made me think of what is now my dream job of being like an electroacoustic or installation beta tester. Like just
I you know what? That'd be I would pay you to do that. Just come in and screw it up, like
yeah.
do the most destructive possible thing you can to this.
Well,
I would pay money to watch. This could be a new live web series, like Nate destroys installation art.
Yeah, exactly. Will it break? Yeah.
Yeah.
People were definitely enacting that here last week. There was this big festival called Light City where it was like all of these light installations up all week down at the Inner Harbor in Baltimore, and like, you know, people running around all over like, you know, they had these seesaws that lit up, and these like planks of light you could walk on, and everyone is just, you know, you have public art out there and people are just like seeing how far they can push it and destroy it.
That's awesome.
Or, you know, I've also found like with interactive art, like you can't predict the way people think something's interactive or are not going to engage with it. So
yeah,
right.
It really has to actually have that kind of public presentation before you know what people are going to do with it.
Yeah, I remember so fondly the stories of a friend, like in the early days of Reason. I think there were some plugins where you could type in values instead. It was as an alternate option to using the knobs that were built in.
Imagine.
I don't remember what it was, but like, so the knob would have a certain range and he would just type in other values that were wildly out of range and get really strange results and stuff like that.
Oh, it wouldn't clip them to.
Well, so it would clip or like do just weird things. And yeah. Cool. And so like, yeah, which I mean gets into the land of hardware hacking and like breaking things for art and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, if we have to.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the rich territory for aesthetically that is being explored right now, and that you do more of, especially in like new and electroacoustic music. Like we're so caught up with polish or have been, of it's like, oh, let's get some artifacts up in here.
Yeah, some rawness.
Yes.
Yeah.
And maybe turn down the compression just a little bit. Doesn't all have to have that.
Yeah.
No, wall of sound all the time.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for chatting about some of these pieces of yours. So we've talked a little bit about this installation that you've got coming up. Do you or that you're gonna meet with the performers and start rehearsals and stuff?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any other projects down the line or any other kind of events coming up that you'd like to plug?
I am shipping off a version of this Futurum installation to London in a couple of days for this Engine Room sound art competition show, and since I'm not able to be there to install it, I adapted it all to be put on a Raspberry Pi that you can just like flick on the switch and it'll start the lights in the right pattern and everything. So that was a big learning process, and also not being there to tell someone how to set it up. So that's going on show in London on May 4th through June 1st, something like that. And then also be well, that's pretty much the next thing coming up, trying to get everything in line for future projects this summer and beyond. Yeah.
Nice.
That sounds like a really interesting challenge, because like as composers, we're all trained in like preparing a score, preparing parts, and you send it off, and you may not interact with them at all besides what's on the page. But doing that with electronic installation, I haven't heard of that like happening before. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, and it's new territory for me. I've worked for an installation artist before who's did a lot of that. Setting these complicated. It's just there's a lot of, well, in addition to the shipping expenses, there's a lot of like things just like have to be organized. It's like I don't, they have the resources to get a Mac with Max on it and like send them the DMX decoder or whatever, but like I don't want any air. I want, just plug it in, turn it on, and it's kind of fun to figure out Raspberry Pis and going along with that as well.
Cool.
So do you come up with like an IKEA style booklet for them to follow the instructions to set it up?
Yeah, that's what I'm working on right now. Like,
nice.
Like the good thing about that piece is you can just kind of like, as long as you have the lights arranged, you can kind of pile the rest of the piano debris on top of it. And it's fine. Yeah.
Nice.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm. Well, great. Well, thanks again so much. It's been a pleasure talking. We've come to the last segment of the show, and we'll talk a little bit after, I imagine we usually do.
Okay.
we're on to the 2-minute challenge, and
it is that time, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's Ben's turn this month, and what are you going to do for us, Ben?
Well, I'm going to attempt to explain wavetable synthesis.
Yeah.
This is something I've been working a little bit with some of my students, because they're trying to figure out different things, and they're like, why am I getting out of memory errors? This program should work. And I'm like, well, maybe your waveform that you read into that buffer is too big, but.
And they're like, what does that mean? And,
yeah. Wait, you mean I don't have to sample one file for every possible note on this instrument?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, no. So I will attempt to talk my way through this.
Nice. Well, do you have a timer? I think I've got one pulling up right now.
I just got the timer up. So, cool. Yep, the good old iPhone timer should work.
All right. Well, whenever you're ready.
Okay. So there are a number of waveforms available using analog oscillators. But what if those are a little stale and you need something more interesting but still periodic? Well, this is where wavetable synthesis comes. Developed by Wolfgang Palm, the founder of the PPG synth brand in the late 70s, and independently by Karma researcher Michael McNabb using the MUS-10 language in '78 for his piece Dream Song, wavetable synthesis takes digital recordings of a single cycle waveform of any shape, to create evolving and changing timbres closer to what you would hear in a live performance on an acoustic instrument. A sound is sampled and played back into a set of tables of samples that we call wavetables. Then these are played back using simple table lookup, like a controlled oscillator with the user controlled starting position for whatever wave is being played. Just basic sampling. Where it differs is in the change of position in the wavetable. A single point in the wavetable could be a given waveform, but the adjacent ones are going to be ever so slightly different, creating timbral variations in the harmonic content, usually heard as being either brighter or duller versions of the same waveform. So if you sweep through these with an LFO, it'll create a sweeping filter effect as long as all the partials are standard integer multiples of the fundamental, which nowadays is really easy calculated, and you can do it on your iPhone. Interpolating between these can create really extremely close approximations of acoustic instruments if you're using related wavetables, or really crazy sonically morphine sounds if you're not. And then, of course, all of this can be run through the usual bag of synth trickery to create some awesome sounds, or my personal favorite, use these as the oscillator for frequency modulation synthesis. And that's just about it. But check out a bunch of stuff from Wolfgang Palm or Native Instruments, or even in Reason, the Maelstrom synth does that, although it adds a little bit of granular synth as well.
Yeah. Just a dash of granular synthesis is always
yeah. Well, you got to dirty it up somehow.
Yeah. Well, sweet.
Yep.
Well, thanks for that presentation. Yeah, how do you think you did, Jason? Seems all right to me.
Yeah, it was great. I learned a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I mean, if you want the really disgusting mathematic part, I know Andy Furnell's book, Designing Sound, has how to implement wavetables in PD, and what was it? I think it's Gareth Loy's Musemathix has how to do it, like just generally in pseudocode as well. If not, Nick Collins, I think, has a chapter on one of his books. So.
I found this great site. I think the name of the artist is Adventure Kid or something like that. But
yes.
Have you seen these waveforms?
I have.
Yeah, it's just like he has like hundreds of these single cycle waves that you can load into a buffer for wavetable synthesis. It's really fun to go through those and get all these different timbres. It's just like you load up this like 1 kilobyte AIF file. And so
wow, nice.
Really great to use with the cycle object in Max, just having fun.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the cycle object in Max is great for using that. And then what else is also good? I know with the Moog, Animoog, it's not true wavetable, but you can load your own samples in there as long as they're single cycle, and go nuts with that as well.
Interesting. Yeah. So. Well, sweet. Now I'm gonna go play with wavetable synthesis. Yeah. Well, thanks again so much, Jason, for coming on the show. It's been great to have you. So we'll have links to all of your various ways that people can experience your work. SoundCloud.com/Jason Charney. Yeah, and it'll all be in the show notes as well. Yeah, any last plugs before we sign off?
No, thanks for having me on Patchin, guys. It's been great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Well, sweet. Well, this has been another month of Patchin. You can check out all of our episodes at soundnotion.tv/PI. That's where the show notes are, and log the past episodes and stuff too. Obviously, you can catch us in whatever podcatcher app you have on your phone or a mobile device or any kind of thing, or in the iTunes store. You can support our show and the rest of the shows on the soundnotion.tv network by going to that website. And there's a little Amazon search box that if you go through that to get whatever you were going to get, we get a little bit of a kickback. And there's other ways to donate on the website as well. And obviously those 5-star reviews in the iTunes store, I think those always help. I haven't been there in a bit, but yeah. Thanks again for listening. I'm Nate Blyton.
I'm Ben Furman.
And we'll see you next month.
Okay.
Great.
Saving files.